Okay, so you finally did it. Got those BCBA credentials. Congrats. Ready to make a real difference out there in the world.
It's a big moment.
But let's be real. Going from the textbook to the real world feels a bit like landing on Mars sometimes.
It really can, yeah.
So that's why we're doing this deep dive, all about Chapter 15 of Ethics for Behavior Analysts today. Think of it like your survival guide for navigating all those ethical dilemmas you'll find in your first job.
You know, what I really liked about this chapter is that it focuses on how the decisions you make right now at the beginning, well, they can really affect your entire career. Makes you really stop and think.
Yeah, no pressure, right.
Right.
One of the things that stood out to me was how important choosing the right workplace is. I mean, obviously, salary and benefits are important, but this chapter goes deeper. It's really about the ethical climate of the entire organization.
Oh, absolutely. It's about their values, their practices.
Yeah.
You know, it all seeps into your everyday work and impacts the ethical situations you come across.
It's kind of like that warning the chapter gives about those job offers that seem too good to be true. Makes me think of that time I thought I'd found my dream apartment. Designer place, amazing location, half the price of everything else.
Oh no, what happened?
The plumbing was from the Stone Age.
Yikes.
Yeah, so if it feels off, it probably is, right? What are some red flags to watch out for in a job then? Like, what should make you stop and think twice?
We'll take a high turnover rate with their BCBAs, for instance.
Yeah.
Or maybe you feel pressure to push programs through without proper review. Those are things to pay attention to.
It's like choosing a roommate, right? You wouldn't sign a lease with someone you didn't think you'd get along with, someone whose lifestyle didn't fit with yours. How can someone figure out that ethical fit when interviewing?
You've got to ask the right questions. Don't just ask a generic question about, say, the organization's history or their mission. Ask something like, can you tell me about a time when the organization had to deal with an ethical dilemma? What was that process like? How did it get resolved?
Love it. Get right to the heart of it.
Right. Don't be shy. Dig deeper. What are other BCBA's experiences? What's the supervisor's philosophy when it comes to ethical concerns? Honestly, being able to see the work environment for yourself, maybe even shadowing someone for a bit, invaluable.
Like a test drive before you buy the car.
Exactly.
Now, setting the stage for ethical practice, that's next, right? Sounds like landing that dream job, it's really just the first step, huh? It's what you do once you're there. Set the tone, right from the start.
Exactly. Those first few months, think of them as like ethical boot camp. You're figuring it all out, seeing how things work, and setting those boundaries early on.
Boundaries. That's a really good word for it. So easy to just say yes to everything when you're new, right?
Oh, absolutely. But the chapter really stresses how important setting those boundaries early really is. One thing I found helpful was just asking for examples.
Examples, like, show me what a successful intervention actually looks like here. Something like that.
Exactly. Ask for examples. How does the organization handle intake interviews? Case write-ups? Behavior programs even. You'll learn faster, plus it shows you're eager and helps you make sure you're on the same page with their expectations.
I wish somebody had told me that when I first started out. I was so overwhelmed just trying to figure everything out by myself.
We've all been there. And speaking of being on the same page, the chapter also talks about, knowing how the organization handles the tougher stuff, complaints, ethical concerns, anything like that. Just knowing the protocol and who to turn to if you need help.
Right. Everyone needs backup sometimes. Which actually reminds me of that story in the chapter about the new BCBA who was asked to conduct IQ testing, completely outside of their scope of competence. Made me realize how important it is to know what you're qualified to do, know your limits, and not be afraid to speak up.
Yeah, it can be tough to say no, especially when you're just starting out. But if something's beyond your expertise, you just have to. It protects you and it protects your clients.
And speaking of protecting clients, can we talk about data for a minute? That's what makes us behavior analysts different, right? We get the data.
It's the foundation. Making decisions based on data, it's at the core of ethical practice. But, the chapter points out it's not just about collecting any old data, it has to be quality data.
Okay, so break that down for me. What does quality data look like on the ground, in practice?
Think of it like building a house. You wouldn't build a house on a shaky foundation.
Right.
Right.
Ever.
Same with data. It has to be reliable. That means you'd get similar results if you measure the same thing again. It has to be valid. Meaning what you're measuring, that's actually what you're trying to measure, right?
Yeah.
And then you need experimental control so you can be sure that it's your intervention that's making the changes you see and nothing else.
So it's not enough to wave a graph around and say, look, the behavior's different now. You've got to be able to back it up with solid data.
Exactly. It's about saying, with confidence, this is what's happening, and here's why. It's evidence-based, not just a hunch. And, speaking of data, it's not just about our own work, right? We have to make sure that anyone we're supervising, they get it too. They understand how important good data collection is.
For sure, even the best intervention in the world won't work if it's not done right. It's like handing someone a gourmet recipe and they swap out all the ingredients. It's not going to turn out how it's supposed to.
Exactly. Effective training, it's more than just handing someone a program and saying, off you go. It's demonstrating, practicing, giving feedback, and monitoring their progress over time. You're really building their skills.
Bringing it back to the core of behavior analysis again, right? Reinforcement, shaping. Those principles are how we teach and supervise.
Precisely. Just like we shape behaviors in clients, we provide positive feedback and constructive criticism to our supervisees. The chapter actually mentions Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, which is a classic.
Love that. Even we behavior analysts can use a reminder now and then about how to give effective feedback. I know I can. Now, when it comes to professional responsibilities. Okay, so let's talk about something that's, well, maybe not the most exciting part of the job.
But important.
Definitely important. Timekeeping and billing.
Yeah, not exactly glamorous.
Not at all. But this chapter really drove home how crucial it is for ethical practice, I mean.
Oh, for sure. I remember when I first started out, I was so gung-ho about the therapy itself. I kind of let the documentation slide.
It happens.
Not my proudest moment.
Live and learn, right. But like the chapter says, it's about more than just getting paid, right? Accurate billing. It's about integrity. It protects you and the client.
Absolutely.
That section on fraudulent billing, though, intense.
Yeah, it's serious stuff. But the good news is, keeping good records is a lot easier these days. There's an app I use, actually it's called Timely. It's been a lifesaver.
Yeah.
Especially with that whole contemporaneous documentation thing.
Contemporaneous documentation.
Yeah, it just means writing down what you did, basically.
Yeah.
As close to the time you did it as possible.
Okay. Way less complicated than it sounds.
Right. Just keeping those records accurate and up to date. It's all about transparency, building trust.
Yeah.
With your clients, with your employer. Everyone. Exactly.
And speaking of trust, let's talk about those tricky dual relationships. When your professional life and your personal life, they get a little too close for comfort.
It's all about boundaries, isn't it? It doesn't matter how friendly you get with a client. Those professional boundaries gotta stay strong. Our objectivity is so important.
It's tough though, right? I remember this one time, a client invited me to a barbecue at their house. I was so tempted. I love barbecues.
Did you go?
I didn't. Something told me it wasn't a good idea.
And you were right. It's always best to be cautious, The chapter actually had some good tips on this.
Yeah.
Setting clear expectations right from the start, on day one, letting clients know where the boundaries are right up front. And if something comes up, just address it openly and honestly.
Like, I can't come to your barbecue, but maybe we can alternative activity sometime.
Exactly. Find another way. It's not always just clients, though, is it? Sometimes it's colleagues.
Especially when you're working with people from different backgrounds, right? Who maybe see therapy a little differently than we do. As a new BCBA, I bet it's intimidating trying to speak up.
It's a real balancing act.
Yeah.
Advocating for a behavioral approach, but also respecting their expertise, too.
Yeah.
It's about using data. Focusing on what everyone can agree on, finding that common ground.
The universal language of data.
Exactly. And if things get really tough, that's when you really need to have a mentor, someone you trust to talk to, someone who's been there.
100%. It makes all the difference.
All right.
And speaking of tough situations, I think we need to talk about it, even though it can be an uncomfortable topic. Sexual harassment.
It's so important.
It is, because even with the best of intentions and all the training, behavior analysts aren't immune, right, to experiencing or being falsely accused of harassment.
Right. And the chapter had some really solid advice. You've got to set those clear boundaries, be mindful of how you're acting, and trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. And if something happens, don't hesitate. Talk to your supervisor or whoever you need to.
It's about your safety. That comes first.
Absolutely.
As we wrap things up here, one thing keeps coming back to me. It's that idea of finding your people.
Your tribe.
Exactly. Building that network of colleagues, mentors, people who can support you when you run into these ethical dilemmas.
That saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
I love that.
It's so true, especially in this field. Because it's complex, it's nuanced. You don't want to do it all by yourself.
No way. Find people who inspire you, people who challenge you to be ethical, to be your best self, and we all need that. So we've covered a lot of ground today, from the very first steps of choosing the right workplace all the way to dealing with really difficult situations.
A lot.
It is. But remember, you don't have to have all the answers right away. Be kind to yourselves, new BCBAs. Stay curious. Keep learning.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
We're rooting for you out there. Go make a difference.
Hear, hear. Until next time, everyone.